If you watch my latest Bannerlord stream, you'll notice that I was lamenting the fact that I couldn't seem to amass enough pikemen to form a perfect 256-man Macedonian phalanx. This was annoying to me because I'm using the Realistic Battles mod, and it seems to actually make spears function well in Bannerlord. Finally. They actually have a purpose when you're on foot. They actually do damage. They actually seem to keep the enemy at a distance. They actually seem to do, in this game, what they apparently did in real life. So I want my Macedonian phalanx, and I'm going to get it. So I started a new game, and as you can see here, I managed to walk around to each town and hire a handful of pikemen, either basic spearmen, pikemen, or elite pikemen. I managed to get about 20 of them together, and then I marched them at these forest bandits to see how they'd do. Now when I marched them forward in close order, they took almost no damage, and then when they contacted with these archers, they absolutely shredded them. As you can see, it was epic. 0 deaths. The only person on my team who even got slightly injured was my healer, who I hadn't actually given any armor or weapons to. However, most of my pikemen were either just normal spearmen or hireling pikemen at the moment. Hireling elite pikemen, which is the top level, and I needed to level them up. So I found this bandit cave, and I decided to just rip through. I just told them basically go attack, and we did it very, very quickly. When asked do I want to duel the bandit chief at the end, I said no. Why would I want an honourable duel with a bandit chief? And we just slaughtered them all. Overwhelming Macedonian victory and 6 levels up. Solid. I continued picking fights that I would easily win, such as attacking this group of rogue peasants who have generously called themselves looters, and, well, just watch this massacre. Pretty brutal. I'm so glad I'm not on the receiving end of this. But as you can see, the spears, the pikes, they're doing a good job. Barely allowing the peasants to even get anywhere close. Total massacre. Except for this one here at the end, who forgot that he was supposed to run up the line and then realised, oh wait, I'm the last person here. I think I'm just going to leave. Wise. So I went around continuing to pick fights, and then I found this guy called James the Scholar, who I thought was an engineer, so I hired him. But it turns out he was actually a healer. But the thing is, he was also way better than the healer I had, so I decided that what I would do is take all the equipment off my healer, because I don't want her to have what I already found for her, and then cast her out into the snow naked. Don't feel too bad for her. When I first found her, she was threatening to gut me, so I was a bit nervous about taking her on as a healer, but the thing is I didn't have anyone else. Anyway, I was running low on money, so I decided to kind of fluke my way through a bunch of tournaments, which I did, thankfully, because the Sturgians allow you to use massive great axes, and I'm actually quite good with a massive great axe. I mean, there's not really much to it, you just kind of whack them with it, unless you drop it, like I've just done, and then without realising it, so I'm trying to punch people. But again, this is what's good about the Realistic Battle mod. Things like this happen. You can drop your weapon. You can get knocked off your horse. This mod is superb. I don't know why the main game isn't like this. The fact that you can crush through blocks is just an amazing thing. It makes the combat so much more dynamic. Anyway, like I said, I was desperately swinging for my life and barely surviving. And somehow I managed to come up on top, but the thing is, all of these tournaments were worth virtually nothing. So in the end I decided they probably weren't really worth my time. I mean, a gallow glass axe was worth about 900. Woohoo! So I continued on the mission to try and improve my phalanx. They definitely needed levelling up, and moreover, I needed Renown in order to try and improve the size of my army. Because at the moment I only had, I think, 22 men. And I really needed more if I was going to have an epic 256-man Macedonian phalanx. So I threw myself at various groups of bandits, including the Sea Raiders here, which you can see I completely trounced. 0 casualties, 0 deaths. This is pretty good because the Sea Raiders themselves are actually pretty dangerous. They've got lots of javelins, they've got fairly good weapons, they've got half-decent armour. They are capable of doing harm. So I continued wandering around, bullying various squads of peasants that I would find roaming the land, and I was starting to feel a bit bad for them, to be honest, because just look how much better the spears are in this version of Bannerlord. They can actually kill things. Killing things on foot with a spear. Unheard of. I love this mod so much. But like I said, I mean, this was just a horrific massacre, and I thought maybe it'd be worth trying to get some slightly more impressive enemies. I'd leveled up at this point, so I had about 31 men in total. So I split them into 2 companies that I could separate and actually use tactically on the battlefield. One I filled with the least experienced men, and the second one I filled with the most experienced men. The plan being send the least experienced men into battle so they could get the kills and they could get the experience. This worked out relatively well as it split the Sea Raiders who were attacking me, and they just found themselves impaled on a wall of pikes. Once the low-level squad had finished off theirs, I just told them to charge into the side of the ones that were attacking my elite men, and it was just an absolute massacre. There's nothing to be said, really. It was just, well, I mean, horrific for them. I continued to discipline and train my lower-level men, now just putting them openly in their own front ranks and just leaving the elite guys right at the back to chuck some axes that they also happen to carry. Because these troops are amazing. They've got everything I possibly want about them. And the low-level chaps held them off perfectly well. As you can see here, I just had an entire line of high-level guys just standing at the back doing nothing because, well, I didn't need them to do anything. They don't need any more experience. It's just the lower-level ones at the bottom who needed to actually do something. And do something they did very competently. Finally, I'd arrived at clan level 2, so I went around recruiting from the various taverns in the cities. This was the only place I could get these elite pikemen, so attrition may well be a problem in the future. Finally, though, I ended up with 46 elite pikemen and me. So I saved it, as I was next to some Imperial army who didn't have a clue what was coming. I lined my pike phalanxes up in a row and then realised I was on the attack. They were moving away from me, in fact they were moving up a hill, and so I had little choice but to advance on them. And pike phalanxes are amazing at many things, but moving swiftly is not one of them. So we began the very long, very slow trek across the battlefield in open terrain, without any cover, up a hill towards an enemy in an entrenched position. I'm sure this is going to go brilliantly. I skirmished with what little cavalry they had, but honestly made absolutely no impact on them. Just as a way of passing the time, their phalanx of infantry on the hill shielded a line of archers, making it very disadvantageous for my slow-moving foot soldiers. But the problem is, I had no options. I had nowhere to go but up, and I had nothing to do but move forward in the face of enemy fire and fend off the repeated nuisance attacks from their cavalry. As the lines began to converge, I noticed that my men were actually slightly out of order, so I had to hurry to try and get them in order and bring them about to be able to use them effectively. Wheeling Company 1, I made them line up correctly, but once they were, as you can see, the spears did a bloody brilliant job. I got Company 2 to start attacking them in the side. Before I knew it, I had an amazing line of pike infantry that was basically holding off the entire and larger enemy army very successfully. I made sure that the dismounted horsemen couldn't do anything serious in the back by jabbing them in the kidneys, and before I knew it, the infantry battle was basically over. We'd shredded through their lines. 1,000 pointy pokes had cut down all of their men, and my men at this point were completely untouched. This phalanx business was really working. But then it became apparent that we still had roughly an equal number of archers stood on top of a hill in a very defensible position, raining down arrows at us, and for some reason all of my men had their shields behind their backs, and I couldn't get them to get their shields out, I guess because their pikes are two-handed. So we had the long, slow slog, totally vulnerable, up this hill to try and kill those archers. As you can see, this is where I started taking casualties. I'm not happy. 2 dead. Of course, once the pikemen did engage with the archers, well, it was just as much of a bloodbath as you would expect. But I was still taking casualties. I really wasn't happy about it. It was clear that at some point I was going to have to get something to deal with archers. Be that my own archers to shoot at them in advance, or cavalry to swing around the wing and stomp them down. But either way, we did win. We had 2 deaths and 6 wounded, which, to be honest, was spectacular, considering we were fighting an Imperial army twice our size. I took a Vargos prisoner, which was as much of a surprise to me as it was to him, to be honest with you, and we leveled up all of our pikemen to fully elite status. This was my first actual victory over a noble army, and to be honest with you, the loot was not that great. Clearly, I was going to need more in the future. I sold the loot, ransomed the prisoners, and then found more pikemen in a tavern to replenish my ranks. Then I decided, well, since I'm already at war with the Imperials, I may as well actually just go back and cause some more trouble, perhaps defeat a few more armies, get a bit more renown, so I can grow my phalanx. However, there weren't any Imperial armies around, so I thought, well, how am I going to attract them? I thought I'd actually try and catch more flies with vinegar than honey by besieging this castle, which worked. But taking on nearly 200 of them while I had barely 50 seemed like a less than wise plan, so I allowed them to split up and decided to take on only one of them. But this time at least I was on the defensive. And it actually wasn't a bad place either, because at the rear of my deployment zone there was a straight ridge upon which I could line up my phalanx and tell them to get into their defensive formation. We waited breathlessly for the bulk of the enemy army to cross the battlefield. They had a reasonable number of archers, but thankfully while we were in our ranks, my men would use their shields and we didn't take any casualties. And their horsemen seemed a little bit nervous about charging in, which is probably wise. Although they did encourage my men to waste their throwing axes. So they did have some use. But the cavalry were unable to do anything of any particular use, ended up getting themselves cut up, and so their infantry came in for the charge. And we stood to receive them. The enemy's right wing made contact with my left wing first, where I was standing, and we fought furiously in order to hold them off and keep them back. And all along the line, as you can see, a massive scrum took place, with them desperately trying to break through our pike wall, but they were unable to get even one of my men down on the ground. We held our ground gallantly and poked furiously until the enemy found themselves weakening. Once the enemy's numbers had been sufficiently thinned, I raised my sword and called for the charge. We cut down the last and moved at a run across the field, but again, like before, I found that my men had their shields on their back because they were carrying their pikes and running into lines of prepared archers. And once more, I took a few casualties. Angry at this, myself and my men leapt among them. The slaughter commenced, and before long, their entire army was completely routed. We let them flee. I had no means of chasing them down. In the end, we had taken 5 men wounded and 3 men dead. A very reasonable number, all things considered. And this showed me that, yes, I think that the pike phalanx might actually be a very effective weapon for fighting large-scale battles. It was clear that it could punch well above its weight, and I was very much looking forward to using it against a more powerful opponent. I've really been enjoying this little playthrough that I was doing the other night. This was genuinely good fun, and I'm going to try and continue it in future, because I really do want that perfect 256-man Macedonian phalanx.